So I want to talk about a couple things here. Cold air intakes, cold air going into your engine. I'm gonna say it's worthless. Two, I'm gonna talk about EGR valve position, and three, EGR orifice temperature. I'm gonna clarify everything up, so just kind of bear with me. Um, I changed what I monitor in my EasyLink. I still got the DPF pressure. It says 0 psi. That doesn't mean that there's literally no pressure in the DPF. It's just what the RAM has identified as a baseline 0 psi. How much air that's going through the DPF before and after. So before and then after, that's the delta pressure. The DPF delta pressure is the pressure that's the difference between before the DPF and after the DPF. So the air going through the DPF, 0 psi, and then by the time it exits the DPF, the difference, at least in this snapshot, is 0.37 psi, which isn't much. It's not even 1 psi, not even half psi. But anyways, I got EGT 1, 2, and 3. EGT 1, again, that sensor is before the diesel oxidation catalyst. EGT 2 is right in between the diesel oxidation catalyst and the DPF. And then EGT 3 is after the DPF. I don't need to monitor EGT 4 or 5 because that's before and after the SCR system. Then I found some more things I can monitor in EasyLink. EGR valve position. I thought that was kind of cool to monitor. I kind of want to know how much EGR is being pumped back into my engine. And then EGR orifice temperature sensor. That's important. That's a really important sensor to monitor. Why? Because it lets you know how hot the gases are that are being reintroduced into your engine. So this is where I'm going to touch on cold air intake systems and the aftermarket or even the stock systems, and how they say that you have to pump in cold air. That's how you make power, right? Well, if your truck has EGR, it doesn't matter if you're drawing cold air. I've already touched on cold air intake systems and intercoolers, because if you have an intercooler, it doesn't matter if you have a cold air intake system or an open air intake system where there's no box covering the air filter. It's just open and you're drawing in engine heat. It doesn't matter. But not only does it not matter because it has an intercooler, but if your truck has EGR, look at that EGR orifice temperature, 249 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that temperature, that's how hot the EGR gases are that are being reintroduced into your engine. Okay, this is not EGR orifice temperature that is before the EGR. Look at EGT 1, 752 degrees. Okay, that is the exhaust gases that are coming out of the engine, right, into the manifold, through the turbo, down the turbo downpipe, right before the diesel oxidation catalyst. 752 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot. The EGR cooler is doing its job because you can see that it reduces that heat significantly. Look at that, 249 degrees Fahrenheit. That's much cooler than 752 degrees, but it's still hot air being introduced into your engine. That's why a cold air intake system means nothing. It's worthless. You can have an open air intake system and draw in that engine heat because it doesn't matter, because your engine with EGR is already pumping in hot temperatures. So that's why cold air intake systems that are fully covered box, people say you need to have if you're going to buy a cold air intake system, one, some people say it's worthless, but two, make sure it's boxed. You draw in cold air. You want to have that cold air, blah, 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 blah. Even though your truck is already intercooled, so it doesn't matter because that intercooler is going to cool the air regardless. But if your truck has EGR, all that means nothing because the gases being reintroduced into your engine are really hot. 249 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this is a snapshot. I think I took this, while I was driving. My DPF pressure did go, I think, to like 1 or 2%. I mean, 2 psi, but it dropped. My DPF cert load was at like 2 or 3, but it had dropped to 1. And I'll do another snapshot when I got home. And I love my RAM. The emission systems are great. The DPF cert load always remains low. This time I saw highest was 3. 3.00 grams. It's still really, really low. But anytime on the highway, so this is a highway snapshot. You can see here that my temperatures, my EGT temperatures are 700 degrees or higher, 699 degrees, but basically 700 degrees or higher, it's always in passive regen. So it was regenning the entire 3-hour trip from start to finish. Actually, matter of fact, I was doing a lot of in-town driving before I started the trip. I went to go fuel up, started my drive. I think I was at like 2.0 grams or something like that. I was at 3, but it like reduced even when I was in town. But as I was driving, it got down to 0. I mean, it's just it always remains in passive regen, and that's great because I still get really good fuel mileage. As a matter of fact, so let me go to the next snapshot. This snapshot is right when I got home. I parked my truck in the garage. So you can see my DPF pressure is the PSI is 0. I'm at 0.00 grams DPF soot load, and my delta pressure is 0.01 PSI. So you can see here, there's not a big difference in the DPF pressure. There's the air is flowing freely, and again, 0 PSI doesn't mean there's literally no pressure. There is pressure, but Ram and Cummins, the way Cummins does their emissions, they're preset a certain percentage of PSI as a baseline, and that's their 0. That's how much is tolerable that the PSI can build, start at 0, and what PSI should look like after the DPF, and that's where your delta pressure comes into play. But you see here my EGTs are low. We can see my EGR valve position is 89% open, so 89% of the EGR is going back into the intake. And right now the truck is parked. You can see the EGR orifice temperature, it's 194 degrees, so it's still letting hot air, hot gases back into your intake. Now in this photo, I want to show you, this is an old photo of my 16 Ram, but I wanted to show you the sensor. So you'll follow my cursor here, a little arrow, right? This right here is the EGR temperature sensor. This is the EGR orifice temperature sensor. This thing here, this is your EGR valve, okay? Your EGR cooler is here. This is your cold air intake system, right? Stock factory boxes are cold air. Look, it's fully sealed, it's drawing in cold air, right? Goes down into the turbo, gets sucked, through the turbo, push through the intercooler, come back up, go through here, right? This is your intake horn. Exhaust, a certain amount of exhaust, 25% or less, are rerouted through the EGR cooler here, and it's pumped, has a valve here, and it's pumped into your EGR valve and then into your intake. Well, this temperature sensor, this is what's monitoring your EGR orifice temperature. It's letting you know how hot the exhaust gases are before it enters the EGR valve and then into your intake. But you see, at the highest point, the one that I did a snapshot, 249 degrees Fahrenheit. 249 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures are being pumped back into your intake. So again, cold air intake systems are worthless. If you want to have an open air intake, you'll be fine. Because 1, you got an intercooler, and 2, it doesn't matter because your EGR is pumping in hot gases. So it really doesn't matter. But anyways, I just wanted to share that with you. And again, EasyLink is a great tool to monitor these systems, your sensors. Really impressed with the emission system. It seems like the truck on the highway doing passive regeneration, the temperatures are always above 600 degrees Fahrenheit between EGT 1, 2, and 3. And the truck just remains in passive regen all the time. So it's always self-cleaning, and it's great. I haven't experienced an active regen. The truck has had no reason to go into active regen because this time the soot load, the highest I've seen now is 3.00 grams. That's it. Or 0%, 3% or whatever, however you want to look at that. But anyways, just want to share that piece of information, for anyone who, this is good information for anyone who is curious of what's going on in your engine.